Hey everyone, and welcome back. Ready for another deep dive? Today we're ditching the usual maps and borders, well, sort of to explore this idea of functional areas in the EU.
And don't let the name fool you. This isn't some dry academic topic.
Definitely not. This is about how where you live, where you work, even that weekend trip you took, it's all connected in ways you might not expect.
It's about recognizing that those lines on a map, they don't always reflect the reality of how we live, work, and interact with our surroundings.
Exactly. And to help us unpack all of this, we're tapping into a fantastic toolkit developed jointly by the European Commission and the World Bank. It's not just theory either.
Oh, absolutely not. It's full of actual projects, insights, real-world examples from 12 different functional areas across the EU. Gives you a sense of how this actually works on the ground.
Which is what we're all about here, getting into the nitty-gritty. So first things first, what exactly is a functional area?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to just think, oh, it's cities near each other. But it's more than that.
Right, like just looking at a map doesn't tell the whole story.
Exactly. A functional area is about the connections, the economics, the social ties, even shared cultural stuff or environmental challenges that link places together.
Regardless of where, like, the official city limits are.
Exactly. It's about recognizing those links, even if they're not immediately obvious on a map.
And this toolkit really hits that home with the examples, right? I mean, you've got Cluj-Napoca in Romania, super urban, over 90% of people living in the city center.
And then on the flip side, there's West Elmea, also in Romania, but way less urban, under 20% there. Shows you the range we're talking about.
Huge difference. But one thing that really struck me was this idea of urban-rural linkages. It's like we've been trained to think city versus countryside, but this flips that on its head.
Totally. It's easy to think of them as separate, but in reality, they're totally dependent on each other.
Right, like cities need the surrounding areas for food, resources, all of that.
And the rural areas rely on cities for jobs, education, you name it. It's this interdependence that's key.
And the toolkit actually highlights a cool example of this in action. The Cluj metropolitan area and their rural-urban hub thing.
Oh, yeah, that's a great one. They're not just talking about it, they're doing it. Like, one of the things they're tackling is access to fresh, local food.
Which is huge, especially these days. So how's it work?
They created this physical hub where farmers from the surrounding areas can bring their products directly into the city.
So cutting out the middleman, getting those farm-fresh goods right to the people.
Exactly. And it's a win-win, right? Farmers have a market, city folks get fresh food, and the local economy benefits. It's that interconnected thinking in action.
It really shows you how much we need to shift our thinking away from those old boundaries. But it makes you wonder, when we talk about a functional area, it's not like there's a president of Greater Cluj or whatever, right? So how does governance actually work in these areas? Who's calling the shots, and how do all these different places coordinate?
Governance, the million-dollar question. And you're right, it's not as simple as just drawing a bigger circle on the map. The toolkit actually lays out a bunch of different governance models that functional areas use, and it really boils down to finding the right fit for the specific challenges and the context.
So one size fits all doesn't really fly here.
Not at all. Some areas might have these loose networks where mayors and local leaders get together every so often, share some coffee, compare notes, see what's working, what's not.
A little local government networking session.
Exactly. But then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got places like Barcelona, which has a full-blown super-municipal authority.
Super-municipal authority now that has a ring to it.
Right. It's basically like having a whole extra layer of government above the individual cities that specifically focuses on issues that affect that entire metropolitan region, transportation, infrastructure, even economic development.
So recognizing that some things are just too big, too interconnected for any one city to handle on its own.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that we're seeing more and more countries recognizing this need to formalize functional area governance. Like Romania, for example, they recently passed a whole law on metropolitan areas, laying out how they can be set up, how they're governed, even the financial mechanisms.
So it's not just encouragement, it's giving them the actual tools and structure to make it work.
Exactly. Which brings us to what I think is the most exciting part. The actual projects these functional areas take on.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about frameworks and laws, it's about seeing that on-the-ground impact.
Right, turning those plans into action, getting things built, programs launched, that sort of thing.
Exactly. And the projects run the gamut. You've got what you might call the hard infrastructure projects. Zagreb in Croatia, for instance, they're using a functional area approach to tackle urban regeneration.
Okay, urban regeneration, so like revitalizing rundown areas.
Exactly. They're focusing on redeveloping those old industrial sites, the brownfield sites, as they're often called, turning those often neglected areas into something new and beneficial for everyone.
From eyesore to hopefully something awesome.
Th-
What else?
Then you've got Brno in the Czech Republic doing some really cool stuff with what's called transit-oriented development around their new railway station.
Transit-oriented development, now that one's new to me.
It's about creating these really livable, walkable neighborhoods centered around public transit hubs, like train stations. So you can live, work, shop, do all your stuff without ever needing to rely on a car.
Ah, I get it. So less traffic, more sustainable living, all that good stuff.
Exactly. But it's not just about bricks and mortar either. Krakow, Poland, they've gone the data route and created a metropolitan data observatory.
Data observatory. That sounds kind of cool, if I'm being honest.
It is. It's about using data to track all these key trends across the entire metro area. Things like how the population's changing, traffic patterns, air quality. And then they use that data to make smarter decisions about urban planning and development.
So instead of each city just looking at its own little bubble, they're getting a bigger picture view of what's happening across the entire region.
You got it. And it helps them identify those shared challenges and opportunities more effectively.
Makes a ton of sense. But I imagine all these projects, from the physical stuff to the data crunching, it's got to take some serious cash. So how do these functional areas actually fund all this ambition? Who's footing the bill?
That, my friend, is the million-euro question. And it's something a lot of people get wrong about functional areas. They just assume it's all EU money raining down from Brussels, but the reality is much more interesting than that.
Yeah, you always hear about those big EU funds, so it's easy to think that's all there is to it.
Mm.
So spill the beans. What are those other funding sources? Where's the money actually coming from?
Well, for starters, you've got what are called shared management funds. Things like the ERDF, the European Regional Development Fund, or the Cohesion Fund. These are big pots of EU money, no doubt. But the name gives it away. It's shared management.
So it's not just like, here's a blank check from Brussels, go wild. There's more to it.
Way more. National governments, they actually have a big say in how these funds are used within their own borders.
Ah, okay. So functional areas need to be strategic, make their case to their own national government to get a piece of that EU funding pie.
You hit the nail on the head. They can't just rely on Brussels. They've got to convince their own capitals that their project is worthwhile, that it aligns with national priorities.
I bet that leads to some interesting dynamics, especially if you have multiple functional areas within the same country, all vying for those same euros. Competition gets fierce.
Oh, you better believe it. But that's not a bad thing necessarily. It pushes these functional areas to up their game, to really refine their pitch, build strong partnerships, and demonstrate the value they bring to the table.
It's like a whole other layer of strategy and negotiation beyond just the project itself.
Absolutely. But here's where it gets even more interesting. You also have these direct EU funding opportunities that functional areas can tap into.
Wait, so they can just bypass the whole national government thing and go straight to the source?
In some cases, yep. For example, you've got programs like LIFE, which focuses on environmental initiatives, or Horizon Europe, which is all about research and innovation. These are open to a wide range of applicants, including functional areas, sometimes even individual cities or towns within those areas, as long as they have a solid project proposal.
So it's not just about size or political clout. Even a smaller functional area with a really innovative idea has a shot at securing some of that sweet, sweet EU funding.
Exactly. It's about having a compelling vision, a strong plan, and showing how your project contributes to those broader European objectives. And let me tell you, some functional areas have become masters of this funding game.
Oh, yeah. Any standout players come to mind?
Oradea metropolitan area in Romania, they're doing some really impressive things. Not only have they been incredibly successful in pulling in funding from various EU programs, they've actually taken it a step further. They created their own revolving fund.
Right up. Their own revolving fund. That sounds next level. How does that even work?
It's actually pretty clever. They take a portion of the funds they get, whether from the EU or other sources, and pool it into this dedicated fund. And then smaller towns within the Oradea metropolitan area, if they have a project that aligns with the overall strategy, but maybe they don't have the resources to navigate those complex EU funding applications, they can apply to this local revolving fund.
It's like they've created their own in-house funding stream to make sure everyone benefits.
Precisely. And it really embodies that spirit of shared success, which is what functional areas are all about. It's not about leaving anyone behind. It's about saying, we're in this together, and everyone has something to contribute.
It's really refreshing to hear, to be honest. There's so much talk about divisions and competition, but functional areas, they seem like a way to bridge those gaps, to find those win-win solutions.
Couldn't agree more. And it's not just about those in charge calling all the shots either. Citizen participation, getting people involved, that's a huge part of what makes functional areas tick.
You know, I was just thinking, we haven't really touched on the role of citizens in all of this. So often, these big planning initiatives can feel very top-down, but it sounds like functional areas are different. They actually want people to be involved.
They do. The toolkit stresses how vital it is to have citizens engage every step of the way, from identifying the challenges all the way to shaping the solutions. And some of the approaches they highlight are really innovative. Take the Kalisz-Ostro agglomeration in Poland, for instance. They used a crowd mapping platform called Terrifica to get citizens' input on climate change issues.
Crowd mapping for climate change, that's a new one. So how does that work? Do they like pin their concerns on a map?
Essentially, yes. But it's more than just dropping pins. Citizens can use this platform to mark specific spots in their communities where they're already seeing the effects of climate change, things like flooding, areas that get super hot in the summer, or places with bad air quality. And they can upload pictures, videos, even share personal stories about how these issues are affecting their lives.
So it's about putting a human face on these issues, making it real, not just some abstract report.
Exactly. And crucially, it's not just about venting. The platform also lets people brainstorm solutions, share ideas, connect with their neighbors who are also passionate about tackling climate change. It's a great example of how technology can be used to empower people, to give them a voice in shaping their communities.
Love that. It's a good reminder that even if you're not a mayor or a city planner, you can still have a real impact on how your community tackles these big challenges.
Couldn't agree more. And that brings me to a thought-provoking question that I think everyone listening should ask themselves. How do you define success for your region? What are the big issues keeping you up at night? And could working together across those traditional borders be part of the solution?
That's a powerful question to end on. This whole conversation has been eye-opening. Functional areas, they're not just lines on a map. They're about real people, real challenges, and a real chance to make a difference.
Couldn't have put it better myself.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the world of functional areas in the EU. We've covered a lot of ground, from what they are and how they're governed to the exciting projects they're taking on and the creative ways they're finding funding. If you're eager to explore further, don't forget to check out our website for a link to that fantastic toolkit we've been referencing. It's packed with even more insights, case studies, and practical guidance that you can apply in your own community.
And if this episode sparked your curiosity, don't be shy. Reach out and let us know what other deep dives you'd like to hear. We're always on the hunt for our next fascinating topic. Until next time, stay curious and stay connected.